Hi, I'm the Woodpecker today. For more than 10 years, I've been using this sander. It's time to make a new one. Since forever, I've had this small sander that I really hate. The motor is not powerful enough and the band can be stopped if I press too hard on it. It's easier on this side, but this leaves nasty burn marks. I have wanted to change it for the longest time. I even bought this small shop-made 6x48 sander. But I quickly concluded that this is too small and badly built. If I press too hard with my piece of wood, the band stops turning. But since Woodsmith magazine made this edge sander, I've dreamt about making it myself. It took me more than a year, but I finally was able to find a deal with these motors. And one of them will be part of my sander. But the magazine had the motor on the wrong side, and I didn't want a base. So I've decided to draw up my own plans based on theirs. And here's what I'm going to build.
Now, you screw it all together.
If you want to see how to make the exact same sander as in the magazine, I suggest you go and watch Rod's video. He made a fantastic video on the subject. But I start with a small problem. The motors I bought should be operated with 180 volts direct current. So to use them, I'm forced to buy a DC controller. But the first time I turn it on, I make a mess. The wires were touching and I damaged my brand new controller. I need to fix it now. So after removing the 220 volt connector, I put a brand new one. And now using smaller wires, I managed to make it work without any fireworks. I'm very happy. This will work like a charm. I begin the work, according to myself, with the most complicated part of this project, the two metal shafts. In order to make those, I went to see Pierre again. After explaining what I want, Pierre draws this. Next, he spends countless hours making them. I won't even try to explain what he's doing, because for me, it's all magic. When the shafts are done, he makes the end caps. When everything is done, he drills a hole so the bottom cap will be stuck to the drive shaft. Okay, looking at this quickly, you would think it was easy. But this took over 20 hours to finish. But now with those pieces, I'm finally ready to begin the construction of my edge sander. The first thing I do is cut small strips of thin plywood. After cutting 6 small squares, I glue them 3x3 because I need to have this thickness of wood. I consider myself really lucky because for the first 3 days of this build, Peter came from New York State to help. So while Peter is cutting plywood, I'm trying to find the exact size for the hole of my bearings. I don't know if you have ever used a wing cutter before, but finding the right size on the first try is as easy as winning the lottery. I would even say that, just like I did, finding the right size on the second try is like having 5 numbers out of 6. And while I'm making those tests, Peter is cutting a bunch of square pieces of plywood. We mark their center, and I drill all the holes needed for the rollers. But we are far from being done. While I drill the holes, Peter continues to cut some plywood. Perfect. I have all the pieces I will need for the idler roller, and also all the ones for the drive roller. But this one is much more complicated because it has a bunch of different plywood thicknesses. But now we are ready to glue both rollers. While Peter is gluing some pieces that we will need tomorrow, I glue all the pieces for the idler roller. After all the pieces are in place and clamped, I remove the shaft and the ball bearings and clean them right away. I also clean the excess glue inside the hole. I need to do all of this for the drive roller. But because of its special shape, I need to put each tier, one after the other, over the shaft itself. When everything is in place and clamped, I remove the shaft right away. Now we just need to wait for this to dry and leave them like that all night. The next morning, Peter continues to cut the missing pieces of plywood while I take care of both rollers. The first thing I do is cut off the four corners of both rollers. Yes, there are still a lot of pieces to cut and glue together. But even if Peter is taking care of that, I still need to build the jig, which will help me to turn both rollers round. When the holes are drilled for the shaft, I can assemble the jig. Then I go to the rotor table, and there I'll be able to turn this glue up round. After turning one part, I check if I have the right diameter. I'm close, but not there yet. I need to remove a little bit more. And while I'm doing this, Peter is taking care of the T-nuts, which will be inside the base. And finally, when I find the right height for my rotor bit, I can finish turning the roller. But unfortunately, here, I'm a bit distracted. Please don't do this at home. My fingers got caught between my glue up and the jig. And maybe you won't be as lucky as I was by having tons of snow to ease your pain.
Can you give me agony?
But maybe, like me, you will have a nice friend.
I'm really in pain.
I know. That's a sensitive part of the hand.
But don't worry, I just have 2 black nails. Okay, time to stop whining and to keep on turning the roller. And with a bowl full of snow, this helps a lot. When the first roller is finished, I remove it from the jig and reassemble it with the drive roller. And I'm back to the rotor table. And yes, while I'm doing this, Peter still cuts and glue pieces together. One thing I can say is that using this technique to turn the rollers goes pretty well and does a super job. But don't get your fingers cut in it. But I should have started with the drive roller first, because now I need to put back the idler roller to cut the crown. To do so, I add a small shim on one side and lift up the router bit a little bit. Then I recut part of the roller. And yes, you guessed right, while I'm doing this, Peter is still gluing more pieces together. When the first half is cut, I put the shim on the other side and cut the other side of the crown.
Both cylinders?
And now you can see that I have a nice crown on my idler roller. But to make this crown smoother, I put it on my lathe and sand it a bit. I also sand the drive roller. The next day, Peter is still with me, and we start the day by removing the glue squeeze out on some of the glue ups that he did the day before. And finally, we can start to cut those pieces to length. We begin with the frame of the base. When all the pieces are cut to length, we glue and screw them together. We also glue and screw the plywood that holds the frame together. When the first side is done, we do the same thing for the other side. Now we can start to work on the base of the base. After cutting the side straight, I drill all the holes for the screws that will hold the 5 reinforcement brackets at the back. Peter holds the bracket in place while I screw it from the back. When both ends are screwed and glued in place, I put a ruler between both of them. So this way, I'm sure that the next brackets will be at the right place. I have to admit that I'm super happy that Peter is with me, because I don't know how I would have been able to hold the brackets straight and screw them from the back at the same time.
Exciting.
Yeah.
Now we're able to glue both glue ups together. But I cannot put more than a couple of clamps to hold this together. But here I can put 4 screws. Next, we were able to start to work on the tensioner assembly. After tracing the half circle at the end, I can drill the holes for the roller axle. The top hole is an elongated hole. I make it by drilling 2 holes, one beside the other, and I join them with a rasp. Then Peter can cut the top and bottom of the tensioner assembly. To add pressure, I will have 3 springs, which are over 3 dowels. Now I need to drill the holes for those dowels. While I'm drilling this, Peter rips some square strips of hardwood. Then I transform them into dowels. The dowels are the right size for the holes, but a bit too big for my springs. I fix this on the lathe. Now that everything is the right size, I can glue the dowels in place. To do so, I use epoxy glue that I thicken with silica powder. Now I just need to wait for the glue to dry. But unfortunately for Peter, he won't see this sander finished because the last thing he helps me with is to add screws at the bottom into the frame.
So
The next morning, I remove the excess epoxy glue. But I don't know what happened. But one thing for sure is that the dowels are not at 90 degrees from the plywood. I need to modify the plywood a little bit. Now it's perfect. And since Peter has cut a bunch of pieces, assembling the tensioner assembly goes pretty easily. But the top and bottom have one round end. I stick both of them together with double-sided tape and cut a rough round shape. I make it smooth and nice with a rasp. Now I can glue and screw the bottom part. But the top part won't be glued in place because I need to be able to remove it eventually. But I still drill all the holes for the screws. Now I need to take care of the tension. The first thing to do is drill a hole for the threaded rod. Then again, I cut a rough round shape and screw this block in place. When it's done, I can finish its shape. Using this block as a guide, I drill directly into the base of the sander. I remove the tensioner and drill the hole a bit deeper. Now I can put the threaded rod in place, mark the length it should be, and cut it. But before gluing it in place, I will sand everything around it, because it's easier without the rod in there. Now I can glue the threaded rod in place. Next, I take care of the rest of the tensioner assembly. First of all, I hold the top in place with a couple of screws. Then I can take care of the tracking block. I begin by marking where I want the adjustment hole to be. Then I measure the depth of the hole and drill it. Perfect. But I still need to drill the holes that will keep this in place. Since this block needs to move, it's more slots than holes that I need. So I drill 2 holes and finish the slots with rasps. I also need to take care of the stationary block. I begin by finding its center and drill a hole for the threaded rod that will make the adjustment. While I'm at it, I also drill the hole on the tracking block. Then it's time to drill the screw holes of the stationary block. I roughly cut the shape of the tracking block. Put everything together, drill and screw the stationary block in place. After cutting the threaded rod, I can show you how this will work. I just need to unscrew the stationary block and glue the threaded rod inside it. While the glue dries, I can screw the tracking block and give it its final shape. It's now time to take care of the top. But to see this, you'll be forced to come back to the Woodpecker.